All right, Jared Ward, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brett, thanks for having me on.
So you're an Olympic marathon runner. What was your path like getting there? Was running something you became interested in at an early age?
Oh man, I think every runner has a story of how they got to where they got. I mean, I guess everyone in life has a story, and mine's a long one. And so we'll try to give the boyfriend version instead of the girlfriend version of the story. But I liked it in elementary school. I liked the days when we'd run the mile in PE, and it transitioned to me eventually being linked up with the high school coach when I was still in junior high and beginning running with the high school team as a freshman before I was actually in the high school. And I really just liked it because I could race myself and I could get faster every week. I mean, at this point, I wasn't cracking onto the varsity squad. And in fact, I think out of 4 freshmen on the team, I was probably number 3 on the descending order list. And so I really just loved it for this, the idea that I could go out and I could beat myself week in, week out, and I could try to run a faster time than I ran the week before. And then things started clicking in high school, and, grateful for a patient coach that kind of bore with me through my early JV days, and then set up some opportunities in college. And then my college coach kind of saw me as a marathoner, even when I was running 5 and 10Ks in college. And so after that was over, I continued being coached by Coach Stone at BYU and started doing some marathons, and they just kind of clicked for me. I loved the training. I loved the long distances. I think that I'm kind of just built for it.
Yeah, so that's interesting. You didn't start marathoning until after college. Is that how most people go? Like, do they start marathoning young, or is it something you typically pick up later on in your running career?
No, I'd say it's typically, at least at the kind of the high end level, there's often some track racing beforehand. And I think one of the reasons for that is just that as you work that speed system and that VO2 max type training, you sort of raise your ceiling for your potential as a marathoner. And then you see runners kind of transition to the longer, more aerobic marathon running later in life after they've already trained that VO2 system really well. And I think, it because runners run, late into life, and we probably don't even peak aerobically into our 30s or 40s. And I think there's even some academic cases for the opinion that we never really peak aerobically. All that happens is our body can't keep up structurally. Our bones and ligaments and muscles start breaking down. And so I think it takes a long time to develop the systems to becoming a marathoner. And there's some other things you can work on early. And so no, I don't think that my approach was necessarily uncommon, but I certainly was happy at how I responded to the marathon and really fell in love with it so early.
So right now you're training for the 2020 Olympics, but here's the thing. You're also a coach yourself. You're also a statistics professor, and you're a husband and a father. That's a lot on your plate. I mean, what made you decide against just being a pro runner?
I think there's just too many good things in life to just enjoy doing one of them. I don't know, and I think, I certainly cut back on distractions as we approach an Olympic cycle. And there are phases where I focus on one aspect of life, maybe a little bit more than another. But I think that balance is a key in general to longevity. And I found that, I'm not going to run all day long. And so I have a few choices with what I can do in those hours in between running. And I can watch Netflix, or I can play with my kids, or I can teach a statistics class or coach a few other athletes. And so I've just, filled my day with things that I love. And it's it's some of these other things that really fit around running nice, I think. But I don't know. I just think I'm a happier person when I'm doing all the stuff that I like, instead of just sitting and waiting for the next run to come around.
Right. And I imagine that helps your running too, as well.
I've 100%. I think so. I think when you get too hyper focused on one thing, you subject yourself to being burnt out from that one thing really quickly, or in the case of running, overtraining and finding yourself injured. And so yeah, Brett, I think it's blessed me in a lot of ways.
I mean, are there any habits or routines that you've developed to help you find that balance? Like, do you have certain times of the day where you run, and then certain times of the day it's family time? What does that look like?
Sure. I'm trying to get up and get out the door to a morning training session as early as I can. And on the days when I can get out the door before my kids are awake, it normally is a little bit more smooth for me. And then, and then it's kind of the idea of how do I manage things when I get back. So as soon as I walk into the door, I have 4 kids. The oldest is 7 and the youngest is 3 months. And so when I walk in the door, those kids are ready for dad to be home. And so it's become a game of, how can I sit in my Normatec boots and read a book to the kids, or how can I get them playing around with my vibrating, meteor rollout ball, and, give one to them and one to me, and we do some recovery together, and they get the kids stretching with me and things like that. And so yeah, I have some tricks for engaging the kids, and then they help me make breakfast and things like that. And I have a lot of fun that way. And then, my kids are young enough that at least half of them are still napping. And so a lot of times when it gets to, 11, 12 o'clock, it's time for a kid to take a nap. And sometimes I can peel off with that kid and put a kid to sleep, and then get my rest too. So yeah, there's tricks. And I think it's important to dedicate time to my kids too. And so some days certainly it means that my kids and my wife, take the front seat, and I feel running in the cracks. My wife delivered our 4th baby 3 months ago while I was in the middle of training for Boston. And so I bought a treadmill and put it downstairs, and I bought my kids some gymnastics equipment and put that downstairs. And so I could take the 3 older kids and say, all right, we're going to go downstairs and play for an hour. Dad's got to run, but I want to see what you guys can do on the gymnastics equipment. And so I watch them, and they play while mom rests with the baby. And so it takes a little bit of planning and some creativity and some willingness to shuffle things around, but it brings me a lot of happiness to have kids and to see them grow and to be involved in some of the other stuff that I do. So I consider it all worth it.
That's great. I like that. If you wanted to make it happen, you'll make it happen.
That's right.
Yeah. So let's talk about running and sort of training, your philosophy towards training and recovery and all that stuff. Because I know there's a lot of people who listen to the podcast who are runners or who want to get into running. I'm sure you'd have some great insights. But let's just look at your training schedule right now. Like, how many days, miles are you running a week right now?
So I just ran the Boston Marathon 10 days ago. And so I'm just getting back into it right now. I ran 6 or 7 miles yesterday, and I did a little kind of a speed play 10-mile run today where I went, a couple minutes faster and then slowed down for a couple minutes, and kind of testing things out and making sure that everything's feeling good. And I like to be pretty cautious coming off of marathons to make sure that I'm recovered before I really put the throttle back down again. But in general, I train 6 days a week. I take Sundays off, and that's a day for family and a day for church. And so I don't train Sundays. Occasionally I'll race on a Sunday, but I prefer not to. And then the other 6 days, I'll have harder workouts on Tuesday, Thursday, and a long run on Saturday, and fill it in with mileage totaling somewhere between 100 and 120 miles a week, depending on where we're at in the training and intensity and things like that. And then throw in a couple of lifts and, probably 2 or 3 hours of cross training on the exercise bike, normally downstairs with my kids watching Coco or Moana or whatever they're into.
Well, let's talk. There's a lot. We talk about strength training. I want to talk about that.
Sure.
But let's talk about, like, how do you program yourself or maybe other folks as well? Like, I do barbell training, and so I'm typically looking at like 3 months of like training where you're first couple weeks you're doing volume, and then you increase the intensity a bit, and then eventually you peak. Is there something similar that goes on with your training, like where you sort of break things into cycles?
Yes, absolutely. And I consider a training cycle around the same as conventional for lifting, and my lifting cycle kind of mirrors in terms of what we're doing in the running stuff. And so yeah, it's a 12 to 16 week cycle, maybe as long as 20 weeks if I'm starting really from ground zero, or when I'm coaching athletes that are really starting from ground zero. And then we build into it. And so, it's a volume phase at the beginning where for running and for lifting, we're building up volume and resiliency to training. And then we go into kind of more of a strength phase where we're doing tempo runs and marathon pace stuff. And we're gradually increasing volume as our body adjusts to that. And then towards the end, there's a little bit more of a speed segment where you cut down on volume and intensity gets a little bit higher. I think in the marathon, that training is a little bit more subtle than if it was a 5K or a 10K where you'd really jump into the speed. The reality is, in a marathon, you're never going to be hitting oxygen debt, and so it becomes very important to train the aerobic system and then to be well rested and tapered up before the race. And so I think in marathon training, we see this building phase, and then our strength phase slowly transitions to a little bit of a speed phase. But on paper, you might look at it and say, no, that's still very much strength. But there is a little bit of that. And then certainly in the lifting, I'm doing sets of 8 to 10 really early in this segment, and then I'm doing sets of 7 and sets of 5 and then sets of 3 towards the end. And so very much follow kind of the conventional periodization of training.
And what does your strength training look like? So you talked about the sets you're doing volume and then increasing intensity while dropping off volume. What kind of lifts are you doing?
So power lifts, Olympic lifts like cleans and snatches, squats and lunges and step ups, a little bit of time on my hamstrings, RDLs, or, I love Russian leans or Nordic curls, those kind of exercises. And then I leave about 6 minutes at the end of my workout for a push and a pull on my arms. And that's about all I do up top. And my lifting isn't, this massive long workout. It probably takes me on average 40 or 50 minutes to do, where I'm doing some sort of Olympic lift. I'm doing some sort of, something like squats or lunges, and maybe I'm supersetting that with some sort of plyometric, and then I'm doing some hamstring work and a push and a pull on my arms. So, it's very much ancillary to what I'm doing as a marathon runner, but I think it makes a difference. And there's a lot of research out there, the compelling research that says that, when you lift and when you lift heavy, it makes you a more efficient endurance athlete. And so when it comes to running, you force, we do the same running motion day after day. Your muscles are going to slowly lose the volume of firing capacity in them, because you don't need to fire every muscle fiber to push yourself for the next step on a 10-mile run. But you get under a heavy bar and you're squatting, and you get down there in the bottom of a squat, you demand a lot more of your body. And so the theory behind that of why we see runners more efficient is that it just it makes a difference in terms of the volume of fibers you have activating for you. And I just feel better when I'm lifting. I feel better when I'm strong. I feel like I recover a little bit faster. I'm a little more resilient to injury. And so it's an important part of my training cycle, but it's not a very, in terms of the percentage of time I spend lifting, it's a very small part of my training.
And where do you fit in your strength training? So you're running in the morning. Are you lifting in the afternoon? Is that what it looks like?
Yeah. So on most days I run twice a day. And so on my hard days, I'll lift after hard workouts. So typically coach has things set up for my more interval like training or tempo runs on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so, I'll run that in the morning, and then I'll come back in the afternoon and do a shorter run before a lift to kind of warm up. And then I'll do my lift on those hard days. I like my easy days as really recovery days. And so I want the days in between my hard workouts to be rest. And so I kind of try to pack it all into one day and then allow myself some recovery time.
We'll talk about recovery here in a bit. What's your approach when you're training, when you have a day when you plan a program cycle, you are trying to pre-plan the stress that you put into your body so you can recover and adapt. But then there's other stuff that comes into life, like, the kid's up until 3 o'clock in the morning throwing up. You have a bad night of sleep, which adds more stress to the body. How do you manage that? Like, are there days where you have to back off a bit and then ramp up again?
Absolutely. And I think that is key to long-term sustainable improvement. If you just put your head down and push through, you're liable to get injured. And I think, when I was in college and even just out of college, 3 and 4 and 5 years ago as an early marathoner, I think I kind of did that. I just put my head down and said, okay, I'm in the training cycle. So no matter what happens, I'm hitting this workout. And these are the paces I hit this workout in last time. So I got to hit the same paces this time. And to a certain extent, it worked. My body was young enough to recover and handle that mentality. And as I've gotten a little bit older and I just turned 30. And so not super old, but I feel older, and I don't recover as fast. And what I've had to learn is that I really do I need to take those kind of things into consideration. And sometimes I wake up and say, you know what, today's not the day. So it's either going to be the same workout, but at 70 or 80%, or it's going to be, we're just going to take another easy day to day, and we'll talk with coach and we'll replan this workout when I'm ready for it. And I think this mentality that really has developed for me over this last year has been to just let the fitness come. And so instead of trying to force some sort of result or force the weight or the times in training, I just say, you know what, it's an effort-based thing. I've run long enough that I know what things should feel like when I'm healthy, and I know what pushing too hard is. And so I just let the fitness come and try to be a little bit more patient. And I've had a lot of success with that. I ran my best marathon time, Boston, just a week and a half ago. And if you looked at my training, there weren't really any fireworks workouts. There weren't anything where, if you compared him with other training cycles, that you'd say, oh man, he's running faster than he's ever run before. That just wasn't the case. But in general, the big picture was much better. There were less peaks, but there were less valleys. And I feel like I learned something about staying consistent and being patient. And so, yeah, you got to, and especially as you get older, you got to listen to your body. You got to respect your body, and you got to take care of it.
Well, let's talk about recovery. What's your approach to recovery? So you mentioned some things you're doing. You're doing the Normatec. You're doing the vibrating massage ball. Tell us more about that.
So I married my high school sweetheart from high school. Actually, we met on the track team. But when we got married, she had been considering massage therapy school, of which I was 100% supportive. And so she ended up going to massage therapy school and is a licensed massage therapist. And that's been a big blessing. And so she'll work, if I come home and something has flared up, she has me on the couch, within minutes of walking in, and she's working on it. And I think that quick attention to injury has been beneficial over the last many, many years of our marriage and of me competing. I also have another massage therapist that I see sometimes when things are just too crazy at home with the kids. And I try to make it a point in training to get to him, once every week or every other week. And then I'm still close at BYU, training with my same coach, and in fact, running with the guys on the team occasionally. And the trainers and physical therapists at BYU have been so nice to continue to spend some time with me when I have something flare up or when I need some attention there, and chiropractors. And so I do try to make sure I'm staying on top of these things. And when something flares up, you want to get some attention to it really quickly. And so the Normatec and the vibrating meteor ball and some of those kind of self-massaging stuff I'm definitely using at home, but I'm taking advantage of a lot of things. And I think it's made a difference when you're trying to perform as high as your potential is. You're putting your body under a lot of stress, and I think it comes back to respecting your body and respecting recovery as much as you respect putting your head down and training hard.
Well, you mentioned you take Sunday off once a week. Are there periods in your training or during the year where you might take a week or two off, or are you always running and you just might taper off and just do a slow jog on those days where you just or those weeks where you need some time off?
Really, unless in the sake of injury, and that I really just need to take a minute and reset and get things healthy again, the only time that I take off besides Sundays are right after a marathon. And I'll give myself, a solid week of at least little, if you're going to call it training, it's 20-minute runs at much slower than I typically run. And it's more just jogs to try to get my legs feeling better and get a little blood flow in there. It's hopping on a spin bike and spinning for a few minutes. And sometimes those weeks after marathons are just totally off. I don't do anything. And so I would say I give myself really 2 weeks of pretty solid recovery after a marathon. So, in the second week, it's kind of phasing back in and making sure that I'm healthy and things like that. And then it's just kind of listening to things and, listening to my body. And if we get to the end of a season, that doesn't end with a marathon. Sometimes there still is, a week or two that I just need to take off and reset. And I think the reset is as much mental as it is physical. So for some people, they can wake up the day after a marathon and they can go out for a run and they can continue running every day. And it's still a good reset time because they've let go of things mentally and it just works for them. And for me, the diet aspect and the training aspect and the focus aspect has just been so much that I'm ready to just say, you know what, I don't want to think about that for a few days. And that ends up being a really, I don't know, relaxing and I think a very positive mental thing for me.
What does it feel like? How do you feel after you finish a marathon? Or like, are you like fine like immediately afterwards, and then like the next day you just feel like someone's beating you with a hammer? Is that what it's like? It's like when I do powerlifting meets, like
Yes.
I feel fine as soon as I'm done with it, but like the next day when I wake up, I feel terrible.
Yeah, and so when someone who's never run a marathon asks me how it feels after a marathon, that's normally what I say is I say, that day, you've taken off the off season, you go back into the gym and you squat really heavy. And then 2 days later, you're trying to walk downstairs. That's kind of how it feels. And I think in the marathon, you do feel, I was feeling pretty, you walk slow. As soon as you hit the finish line and your body's done, things start shutting down. You've been pushing your body for longer than it's said you could. And so there, I'm walking slow that day, and even just like walking, up the steps into the hotel, I'm holding on to the rail and kind of helping myself up. But then that seems like nothing compared to how it feels when you wake up the next day and roll out of bed, or when you wake up 2 days later and roll out of bed. So yeah, you definitely get some of that delayed onset soreness that 2 days after the marathon is certainly onset. And then a couple days later, you start to feel normal again. And the first few jogs feel a little weird. Like sometimes it just feels like your muscles aren't quite firing right. And I don't know if there's any other way to explain it. You're kind of back in terms of the soreness is gone, but it just feels funny. And then normally after, a week or two, it's kind of back to normal.
Well, you mentioned diet. What's your diet like? And does it change depending on where you're at in your training cycle?
Absolutely. I think, certainly a part of being a marathoner is trying to keep a lean and light frame. But I think the bigger part of it is fueling with things that are going to recover you and give you the energy to keep training. And so, I picture a snapshot of my diet would be, I start the day thinking, okay, I need probably 1,500 calories just to live. And then for about every mile that I'm running, I need another 100 calories. And then if I have a lift, I need a little bit extra there. And if I have some cross training, I need a little bit extra there. And so I very much start the day looking at what my training is going to be and how much that means I need to replenish in my body through the process. And then I break up the day in terms of saying, okay, I need a snack before I run, normally high carb. I need to get something in right after I run because that's going to help with recovery. And so that needs to have a little bit of protein in it, but be mostly carbohydrates. And then, in my meals, I'm saying, okay, I need to get a good chunk of protein in here and I need to get, eat for volume. I tend to be just so hungry that I'm pushing the vegetables and things like that just for some volume. And then healthy fats. Like I think that I've had some genetic testing done and it seems that my body metabolizes fat really well, which would indicate that I'd be able to respond to a marathon well. And frankly, that's what I crave. I crave the savory kind of fatty stuff. I'm eating nuts or nut butters. I'm putting avocado on salads or sandwiches and things like that, trying to get, a healthy dosage of fats integrated into my diet as well. So, and that's kind of the snapshot, if you will. I've found that eating right after exercising is critical if I'm hoping to exercise later that day. Just jumpstarts recovery. Glycogen stores are most receptive to being replenished in the 30 minutes following exercise. And I feel that. And then also getting a little protein in right before I go to bed seems to help me not wake up starving in the middle of the night and just helps me feel a little bit better in the mornings.
Are you tracking macros, or are you just sort of like, well, I need a little bit of protein, a little bit of fat?
No, absolutely tracking macros. And I counted calories very meticulously for a time in my life. And I feel like that exercise, sometimes we get discouraged about embarking on new things, especially as it relates to diet. It feels so so lifelong and limiting, and we are imagining all the desserts that we're going to go without or whatever. But I felt like just the experience of tracking my macronutrients for an extended period of time, and maybe you only need a couple weeks of that, but I did it for a couple months. I feel like that exercise gave me a really good handle of just looking at food and knowing roughly what I'm getting from that. And so I don't have a notepad or an app on my phone in my back pocket that I'm entering in stuff as soon as I eat it, but I have a macro count going on in my head every day, going through the day, making sure that I'm keeping myself fueled and that I'm getting my what's about 150 grams of protein in at least every day, and making sure that I'm getting enough in that I can continue to train the next day.
And what's your take about like low carb eating or intermittent fasting? Because in the past few years, I've seen a lot of long distance runners like swear by it. Like this is the thing that's a game changer for them. But other ones who say, well, no, it's like the high carb actually is what we need. So what's your approach to that?
So I think there's certainly merit to it. And there's, I mean, maybe the merit in itself is just that you and I and many others have heard stories of people going on these low carb diets and then running really well. I think as it relates to really high level metabolism, I mean, when I'm running a marathon, my heart rate is probably in the 160s, maybe as high as 170, and I'm cranking through fuel. And so when I've talked with nutritionists, some of the research that has applied in general and has indicated that these kind of keto-like diets could be beneficial for endurance athletes, their opinion is that in my case, I still need a very high carb diet just because of the rate at which I'm burning fuel. And I think that, I'm blessed to have a metabolism that metabolizes fat at a pretty good rate already, which seems to be one of the reasons to kind of cycle, is to train your body to metabolize that fat. And so in my case, I'm still relatively high carb, probably 50 to 60% of my caloric intake is carbs, but relative to the guys that I'm racing against, that's fairly low. I'd say you look at like the East African diet, they're probably eating more like 70 to 80% carbs. And so I don't know. I'm an advocate of a balanced diet. I'm an advocate of just these whole foods and eating what your mom would put on your plate, and that kind of a mentality as it comes to fueling.
So you mentioned earlier about running is often like there's a psychological aspect of it. It's a mental game. How do you keep yourself from being bored or getting burnt out from your workouts, where it's just, man, you're pounding pavement day in and day out, year after year?
Well, you just have to bite off what you can chew right now and try to not look so far in the future that you can't fathom it. I mean, as it relates to the marathon, I think, we talk about hitting the wall in the marathon, right? And around miles 16 or 18 or whatever it is, runners experience this effect where all of a sudden it feels like you're pushing into a wall. And I don't think that it's so much one step we're burning glycogen and then the next step we're out of glycogen and we're burning fat, or some crazy thing like that, as so much as it is you look up and you see mile 16, and for the first time in the race you say, oh no, there's 10 miles left and I don't know if I can make it. And that oh no moment can be so debilitating. I remember running, I was competing in Rio in the Olympics in 2016. The lead pack made a move to separate. There were probably 50 of us running together, and then the guy who ended up winning the race took off. And there were a few guys that went with him, and I was kind of in that middle ground of not really going with him, but not really running with the other guys. And there were a couple of us in the middle ground, but I started thinking, oh no, I actually don't feel that good. And I'm 10, 11 miles from the finish line, and I don't know what's going to happen. And, and then I start thinking all these what ifs. Well, I'm running with Team USA on my chest. What if I can't do this? What if I'm not tough enough for it? What's all of these people, what's coach going to think? And what's my wife going to think? And I think when you take yourself out of the present, one step in front of the other, and take yourself into this world of the future, you open yourself up to anxiety. And that's what I was feeling. My sports psychologist in college would always say, fear and anxiety live in the future, regret and remorse live in the past. None of those emotions exist in the present. And so he conditioned me to, when I start feeling anxious or regret or anything like emotions like those, to think, Jared, you're not living in the present. You've got to figure out how to get yourself back to the present. And so in this middle of this Olympic race, I started thinking, okay, what can I do? And my next water bottle was in 2 miles. And I thought, you know what? I don't know if I can make it to the finish line, but I know I can make it 2 more miles to my next water bottle. So that's all I focused on. I focused on keeping form and rhythm and getting in my next water bottle. And I got there and I drank it and thought, I don't know if I can make it 8 more miles, but I know I can make it 2 more miles to my next water bottle. And that became the theme for the rest of that run, was getting water bottle to water bottle, and then looking up and seeing the guy in front of me and saying, you know what, I don't know if I can get to the finish line, but I know I can catch that guy, and working my way up. And, and I ended up surprising myself at the finish line, having worked all the way up to 6th place, which is higher than I thought that I could have finished. And I think what got me there was the reality of just running the mile that I was in, and trying to live in the present. And when I thought back to, hey, 10, 11 miles ago, I was thinking, I don't even know if I can make it to the finish line. And then I made it to the finish line in 6th. And so I think it can be a pretty powerful exercise to find something that motivates you, and something that you can say to yourself, or something you can do that gets your mind back to right now and just bites off the chunk that you can manage.
And so, I mean, so you're just thinking about the now, but what do you do to manage the nerves, like before the race starts, before you've actually, the starting gun goes off? Like, do you get nerves before the race, or is that not an issue for you?
Sure. I think, almost everyone feels nerves, and the more times I race and the more times other people race, I think we become a little bit more accustomed to it. But the reality is that before the race starts, the race hasn't started yet. And so I don't know how much good it does to worry about what might or might not happen, a mile into the race, with the exception of, we got to have a race plan and things like that. But an hour before the race, you're nervous. What I think about is, okay, I just need to make sure my shoes are tied tight. I need to get one more swig of water. I need to make sure I'm warmed up properly. Focus on the things that matter and are relevant to what you're doing right now, as opposed to just stressing about what might happen in the future. I think we can always, almost always, we can use the argument, well, I'm not there yet, so what can I do right now that's going to help me when I get there? And I think that type of a mentality can maybe help eliminate some of that anxiety.
Well, let's shift gears to sort of beginner runners. You coach people from all walks of life. You have your own coach. I'm not sure some of the people that you coach are just getting started. When you start coaching people who, like, they want to run a marathon, maybe they've never run a marathon before, what are the most common mistakes you see them fall into when they're first getting started?
Honestly, I think it's getting just so excited about what we're doing that we don't exercise any restraint. When you're looking at, I'm going to use a comparison of Michael Phelps swimming. And, when he's getting into, we're coming up on an Olympics, we're hearing stories of how much he eats and how many hours he's spending in the pool and things like that. And for runners, we need to train this aerobic system, but we need our legs not to break. Running is an impact sport. And so it's not like you can jump in the pool and just, hammer yourself day after day and kind of wait for your body to catch up. We've got to be careful not to get broken. And so I think what I advise my new athletes and new athletes in terms of new to the sport of running is just to be careful about how you're increasing intensity and volume, and do it gradually. And I think if you can get onto some program that's sustainable, it's going to do you so much more good in the long run than if you just get hyper excited about this new fad that you're into and you train hard for 2 months and then you get shin splints and you have to take 2 weeks off. And then you're frustrated at having to take 2 weeks off. And so you get back into it and you're ready to train again and you hammer it again for 2 months. And then guess what? You're injured again. And so I think, to me, the best approach is to try to be patient and sustainable. And it doesn't mean we don't push, because we still push. You still have hard days, but it means after a hard day, you wake up the next day and say, you know what? I need to exercise some restraint and take it a little bit easy today because we pushed hard yesterday. And, I increased volume last week. And so this week I need to just keep the volume the same, even though I feel good. And so, I think it becomes the coach's job to exercise a little bit of big picture restraint. And it becomes the athlete's job to pay attention to how you feel day to day. And when you're tired, listening to that. And when you feel good, taking advantage of feeling good, subject to the restraint that your coach or your supervisor has given you in terms of your weekly volume and your intensity in workouts.
When a person who's transitioning from, say, doing the weekend 5K to like their first marathon, what is it's broad, it's going to be different for every athlete, but like sort of broadly speaking, what does that look like? How long does it take for someone who's never run a marathon before to work up to that point where they can do a marathon?
Well, if you're already running a 5K, then you're a lot further along than someone who's not running at all. So those are different approaches. So someone who's not running at all, we're going to start with some walking and some walking/jogging, and it's probably going to take someone coming off their couch, at least in how I like to train a 5K. For a 5K, it's going to probably take someone coming off their couch to me 2 or 3 months before I say, okay, let's put you in a 5K. And then, but I think once you're running 3 miles, I don't know that it's that crazy to think about building up to a marathon. Now, it seems crazy on paper, but when I was in college training for 5Ks and 10Ks and then transitioned to running the marathon, I think you'd be surprised at similarities in my training. In college, I probably went to running 20 or 30% more volume per week, and maybe not even quite that much. Maybe it was more like 15 to 25% more volume. And my long runs got a little longer and my intervals got a little bit longer and a little bit shorter. So, instead of running mile repeats on the track, I was running 2 mile repeats on the road. And so instead of doing 4 or 5 by mile, I was doing 3 by 2 mile. And so it wasn't maybe as drastic of a change as you might think. And so for someone who's transitioning from, hey, I ran a 5K and I just want to run a marathon, we start with saying, okay, let's leave your training the same, except for your weekend long run. And let's start gradually building volume to a weekly long run. And then as we start adjusting to that volume, we might make a couple of changes to their midweek workouts or their weekly mileage in general, with the in excess to the additional mileage they're going to get from a longer weekend long run. But I think that's the big picture, is just getting that volume up on that 1 day a week. And if we can build to 15, 16, 17 miles on a long run, then when I taper you off and you're well rested, I think you're ready to run a marathon.
Okay. So it's not rocket science.
No, it's not. And I think it's more doable than you might think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, to me, like you say, okay, I can do a 5K, probably not great, but knowing that I could do a 5K, that I could work up to a marathon, that gives me hope.
Yeah. Give me 16 weeks with you, man. We'll get you
okay. There. All right. Well, we'll see. I might take you up on that. Maybe not.
Well, do it. Take me up on it. We might have to cut back on your lifting a little bit, but.
Oh no, I lose my gains, my precious gains. Well, so you mentioned injuries. Shin splints is a common one. Like, yeah, runners often, some of these guys, they're just injuring themselves left and right. What's the common cause of all these injuries? Is it just pushing yourself too hard? Is that what it is?
Well, I think so. If you were to say, for the average middle-aged runner that hasn't really done anything super active since high school or maybe college, you take 10 years and you do a lot of sitting and a lot of walking, and then you go to running, you're using a lot of muscles very differently than you've used them for the last decade. And so while the ambition might be there, and while you still might have that same high school athlete mind, you've got to be a little bit patient with where your body's at. And there are things we can do to help, right? I think if you're into the wrong pair of shoes, a pair of shoes that's not agreeing with the way that your foot's shaped or the way that you make contact with the ground or things like that, then that's certainly going to lead to a higher likelihood of getting injured. But I do think you're right, Brett. In general, it's just that we're just not being quite patient enough as we build up. And it's a hard balance. And I get it. When we decide we want to do something, we want that thing done yesterday. And that's part of the, that's the beauty of and the curse of high achieving minds, is that when you set yourself out to something, you want it done right now. And I think we just have to be a little bit patient with the process, and hopefully still have some of those days where we can say, hey, you know what, let's turn it loose, let's run, let's see what happens. But then on the flip side of that coin, coming back and saying, okay, now let's look at what we were doing 3 months ago, and we're doing quite a bit more now than we were doing 3 months ago. So maybe it's time to exercise some restraint.
So let's geek out with some statistics here. You did your
Okay.
thesis for your master's in statistics on analyzing runners' split times in the St. George Marathon. What were your key takeaways about ideal pacing from analyzing?
Man, I had so much fun with that project, and I realize that I'm labeling myself as a nerd right here, and I'm okay with that. Um, that was a fun way for me to cross the paths, I guess, or the interests of running and of the research and the analytics that I do statistics, and so. We had some cool takeaways. I was working with this data before I had run my first marathon, so I was acutely interested in what the data said and what we could learn from people competing in the St. George Marathon. And we used Boston qualifiers or runners that hit a Boston qualifying mark as our indicator of faster runners in this data set. And so you could argue that it may or may not apply directly to kind of Olympic level athletes, but what we learned was that the people who qualified for Boston were being a lot more patient in their pace. So relative to their average pace, they were starting more conservative. They did a better job at taking advantage of downhills, and I think some of that related to the more average runners just coming out of the gates so hard at the beginning that by the time they got to incredible downhill portions later in the race that they otherwise could have taken advantage of, their legs were hammered. And so we just saw a lot of, it seemed like over and over we were seeing patience is better. Exercise some restraint, save it for the downhill sections later to take advantage and bank up some time later. We also saw that ladies do a better job at exercising this pacing restraint than men do. It might not come as a surprise to us, but and then that as runners age, they got a little bit better at pacing, and so I think it was also encouraging to think that even after a runner has maybe passed their physical prime, they might still be able to expect to see lifetime best performances because they're getting a little bit smarter as they learn how to pace and train just a little bit better. So kind of some cool stuff. But and you could argue that it wasn't earth shattering, but it validated a few thoughts like start patient before my first marathon and some things like that I think contributed at least in some small ways before I really had any marathon experience under my belt.
Are you still like looking at data and using your statistics chops to shape your own training or how you approach races?
Sure. I'm working on a project still analyzing kind of how stride length and stride rate changes across the course of a marathon and how that maybe relates to fatigue and some other things like that. And so yes, I'm always interested in new research. I'm interested in what the research says for getting ready for a hot marathon, and I'm interested in what the research says as it relates to lifting, and interested in what research says as it relates to oxygen uptake requirements and different types of running shoes. And can we come up with optimal running shoes for running the marathon and design those and things like that? And so yeah, I think I'm certainly excited about that kind of stuff. But ultimately the gold standard is experience. And every marathon that I run, I learn something else about myself and something else about the marathon. And I think while the data and the analytics provide some good counsel in general, everybody's so different that the gold standard for you and anybody else should be your own personal experience. And so the data can help when you're an early marathoner. But as you become more experienced, I would more heavily weight your experience to data in general.
Well, Jared, this has been a great conversation. Is there some place people can go to learn more about your work and what you do?
Sure. So I try to be active on my social media. So jwardy21 on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and try to keep you updated on all the upcoming fun.
Well, Jared Ward, thanks for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, thanks a million, Brett.
My guest today was Jared Ward. He's an Olympic marathon runner. You can follow what he's doing at his Twitter account at jwardy21, or check out his website, coachjaredward.com, where you can find information about his coaching services if that's something you're interested in. Also, check out our show notes at aom.is/Olympic Marathon, where you can find links to resources where you can delve deeper into this topic.